Jim Rohn was a gracious man. After we wrote 12 Pillars together, it was one of my first big hits that I had, and I would bump into Jim at some conventions and meetings, and he'd been traveling the world, and Jim would come back and he'd say, everywhere I go, people are talking about that book, 12 Pillars. And then he'd say, Chris, you're making me famous. What a gracious man. The first time I ever met Jim, we were talking about this earlier, was June 2003. It was in Houston, just a hot June. And after the event, Jim and Kyle and I went back to the hotel, and we sat in this little bar, and we had beer, and we ate peanuts, and we talked about the Bible. Now, as a former minister, and Jim, of course, with his background, loved to talk about the Bible. We always used to talk about the Bible. And I'll tell you one of the stories I always loved about Jim was he had such a unique perspective on everything. And one of the times we were talking about the parable of the persistent widow. You know the story, where the widow keeps going back and going back and going back, and finally the judge says, fine. And as the story goes, it's to teach us that we're supposed to go to God and go to God and go to God and ask until he gives something to us. And Jim said, but there's another side to that. He said, sometimes God just wants us to know that he's already answered it. And he said he doesn't want us to keep coming back. In fact, he said, sometimes I think he just opens the door, we knock, and he opens the door and says, what, you again? And it taught me a good lesson, that there are times we need to persist, and other times we need to know that God has blessed us and tells us to go. In honor of Jim, I want to read the actual scripture passage from one of the stories. You've heard him tell it many times with his own unique twist. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by a lake. A large crowd gathered around him, so he got into a boat and sat down. All the people stayed on the shore. Then Jesus used stories to teach them many things. He told them this story. A farmer went out to sow seed. While he was scattering the seed, some of it fell on the ground. The birds came and ate all that seed. Other seed fell on rocky ground where there was not enough dirt. It grew very fast because the soil was not deep. But when the sun rose, it burned the plants. The plants died because they did not have deep roots. Some other seeds fell amongst thorny weeds. The weeds grew and stopped the good plants from growing. But some of the seed fell on good ground. There it grew and made grain. Some plants made 100 times more grain, some 60 times more, and some 30 times more. You people who hear me, listen. Tonight is a tribute to a man that was good ground. The seed fell on Jim Rohn, and as I look around this room, I see so many people who've made such an impact on so many thousands and millions of people, and it got its start when the seed hit the good ground of Jim Rohn.